I watched my mother collapse to her knees in the middle of the courtroom, her face contorted with rage as she screamed, "Those keys are mine. She stole them. Margaret, tell them what you did." Her finger pointed at me like a weapon, shaking with each accusation. I felt 63 pairs of eyes burning into my back, including my children's. The shame was suffocating. Then Judge Calloway simply slid a single piece of paper across his bench. The bailiff carried it to my mother, and as she read those 12 lines of text, I watched the blood drain from her face. She looked up at me, then back at the paper, and whispered, "I didn't know." But she did know. She had always known, and now everyone else would know too. Let me back up, because you probably think I'm the villain in this story. 7 months ago, I wouldn't have blamed you. I'm Linda Pearson, 58 years old, mother of 2 wonderful adult children, and until last year, I believed I knew who my mother really was. I was wrong. For 58 years, I'd been blind to the web she had woven around our entire family. That's the thing about manipulation. When you've known nothing else your whole life, it just feels like normal love. But love doesn't demand the kind of payment my mother expected. Love doesn't keep ledgers. My mother, Eleanor Pearson, raised me in a modest 3-bedroom house in Fairview, Connecticut. My earliest memories are of her humming in the kitchen, the scent of her signature apple pie, filling our home every Sunday. She worked as a school secretary for 37 years while raising me alone after my father died in a construction accident when I was only 4. I barely remember him, just flashes of a deep laugh and calloused hands lifting me up toward the ceiling. After his death, it was just Mom and me against the world. At least, that's the story she always told. "We only have each other. Lindy," she would say, brushing my hair before school each morning. "Family is everything. Family is forever." She'd wrap her arms around me, smelling of white shoulders, perfume, and instant coffee. "Promise me you'll always remember that." And I promised. Every single time. How could I not? She had sacrificed everything for me, working overtime to pay for my dance lessons, sewing my prom dress by hand when we couldn't afford the one I wanted from the mall, sitting up with me all night when I had pneumonia at 16. "This is what mothers do," she'd tell me. "Someday, you'll understand the sacrifices." I never questioned her devotion, not once. When I met Richard during my sophomore year of college, Mom's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "He seems nice enough," she said, stirring her tea with unusual focus. "But are you sure he respects you? I noticed how he interrupted you twice during dinner." She was always noticing things like that, little flaws in anyone who threatened to take my attention away from her. Richard and I dated for 3 years before we got engaged, and with each passing year, her comments became sharper, more pointed. The night we announced our engagement, she excused herself from the table and cried in the bathroom for 23 minutes. I timed it. When she emerged, her eyes were swollen, but she forced a smile. "I just want you to be happy, Lindy. I hope he makes you as happy as you deserve." 2 weeks before our wedding, Mom had what the doctor called a minor cardiac episode. She was hospitalized for 4 days, and we postponed the ceremony. Richard was understanding, but I caught the concerned glance he exchanged with his mother. At the time, I was furious with him for not being more supportive. Now, I understand what he saw that I couldn't. Mom's health issues always seemed to coincide with major events in my life that might pull me away from her. I'll tell you about the pattern I eventually discovered, and you'll see why the timing was never a coincidence. We finally married 6 months later in a small ceremony. Mom insisted on moving in with us temporarily to recover from her health scare. Temporary became 3 months, then 6, then a year. Richard tried to broach the subject gently one evening after dinner. "Eleanor, have you thought about when you might feel comfortable returning to your own place? We love having you, of course." But Mom's hand flew to her chest, her breathing became labored, and Richard never finished that sentence. That night, I slept on the couch with Mom while Richard lay alone in our bed. It was the beginning of the fissure that would eventually crack our marriage wide open. Our first child, Emma, was born 2 years later. Mom moved out a month before the delivery, but only to an apartment 3 blocks away. "I need to be close for when you need me," she insisted, though Richard had already arranged to take 8 weeks of paternity leave. The day we brought Emma home, Mom was waiting on our porch with 3 suitcases. "You'll need help, Lindy. First-time mothers always do." Again, how could I argue? She had raised me alone. She knew what she was doing in ways I didn't. For the first month, she barely let me hold my own daughter. "You're too tense," she'd say, sweeping Emma from my arms. "She can sense your anxiety." I started to believe I was inadequate as a mother, that without her guidance, I would somehow damage my child. Richard tried to intervene. "Linda needs to bond with Emma," he told Mom firmly one evening. "She needs to learn to trust her own instincts." That night, Mom had another episode that sent us rushing to the emergency room at 2 a.m. The doctor found nothing wrong, but the message was clear. Challenging Mom's authority had consequences. When we returned home, exhausted and frayed, she whispered to me in the kitchen, "Richard doesn't understand our bond, does he? Men never do. But we know better, don't we?" I nodded, too tired to fight. That was always her strategy. Wear down any resistance until agreement was the only path to peace. By the time our son Michael was born 3 years later, Richard and I were sleeping in separate bedrooms. Mom had permanently installed herself in our guest room, for the children's sake. She controlled our schedule, our meals, even our arguments, mediating disputes she often created herself. If Richard and I disagreed on something, she would pull me aside later and say, "I couldn't help overhearing. You know he's being completely unreasonable, right?" Slowly, methodically, she wedged herself between us until the distance was insurmountable. Richard filed for divorce when Emma was 7 and Michael was 4. "I can't compete with her anymore, Linda," he said, his voice hollow with defeat. "I'm not just losing you, I'm losing myself." I was devastated but not surprised. What did surprise me was Mom's reaction when I told her through tears that Richard was leaving. For just a moment, so brief I almost missed it, a small smile flickered across her lips before she composed her face into an appropriate mask of concern. "Oh, sweetheart," she sighed, pulling me into her arms. "Men can be so weak. But we'll be okay. We have each other. We have the children. Family is everything. Remember." The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Richard was generous in the settlement. The house became mine, along with primary custody of the children. He moved to an apartment downtown to be close to Emma and Michael, seeing them 3 days a week and every other weekend. Despite our broken marriage, he remained a devoted father. Mom, however, made those visitations as difficult as possible. "Daddy canceled last week," she would tell the children, though he had only been 15 minutes late due to traffic. "He probably has a new family now that's more important." The children would be in tears by the time Richard arrived, and he would look at me with such accusation that I wanted to disappear. But I never contradicted Mom. Not then. The thought never even crossed my mind. She was my mother. She wanted what was best for us, didn't she? After the divorce, Mom suggested selling her apartment. "It makes financial sense for me to move in permanently," she reasoned. "I can help with the children, and you'll need the support now that you're alone." There was something in the way she said alone, a note of satisfaction that I ignored. So my mother officially moved in, bringing with her for decades of accumulated possessions that slowly infiltrated every corner of what had once been my home. Her china cabinet replaced mine. Her paintings covered my walls. Her routines dictated our daily lives. And at the center of it all was her antique key collection, displayed prominently in the entryway, ornate skeleton keys mounted in shadow boxes. "Each one opens something precious," she would tell the children. "Someday, they'll all belong to you." The children were fascinated. I was too busy trying to rebuild my life to pay much attention. I returned to work as an administrative assistant at Fairview Community College, a job I had left when Emma was born. The office had changed. With new systems I struggled to learn while balancing single motherhood. My boss, Dean Anderson, was patient but concerned. "Linda, you seem distracted," he said after I missed an important deadline. "Is everything okay at home?" I assured him. It was, though okay wasn't the word I would have chosen. Functional, maybe. Surviving, certainly, but not okay. Still, I was grateful for the job, for the hours away from Mom's constant presence, for the sense that some small part of my life was still mine alone. Every day after work, I would call home at exactly 5:15 p.m. If I didn't, Mom would phone the office in a panic. The children were worried, she would say, though when I'd ask Emma and Michael later, they'd look confused. "Grandma said you were worried," they'd tell me. It was these little discrepancies that finally made me start paying attention. The subtle contradictions, the convenient timing of her health scares, the way the children's accounts of their days often differed from Mom's reports. Small things, easily explained away, but they began to accumulate like snowflakes, building into something I couldn't ignore. The awakening happened gradually, then suddenly like falling asleep, and then jerking awake with the sensation of falling. The catalyst was an innocent question from Michael, who was by then 8 years old. We were in the kitchen making cookies, one of the few activities Mom still allowed me to do with the children without her supervision. "Mom," he asked, rolling dough between his palms, "why does Grandma have a key to Dad's apartment?" I froze, the cookie sheet clattering against the counter. "What do you mean, honey?" I asked, keeping my voice casual though my heart had begun to race. "The special key," he explained. "The one she uses when we go get Dad's important papers when he's not home." That night, after the children were asleep, I examined Mom's key collection for the first time in years. In the third shadow box, partially hidden behind a large brass key, was a modern key with a familiar blue tag, the same kind Richard's apartment building used. I recognized it immediately. A chill ran through me as I realized what this meant. Mom had been entering Richard's apartment without his knowledge. But why? And how often? What important papers was she taking? The questions multiplied, but one thing was certain. This wasn't normal. This wasn't right. The next morning, I called Richard from work. We hadn't had a civil conversation in years that wasn't directly about the children, but this couldn't wait. "I need to ask you something," I said when he answered. "Have you been missing anything from your apartment lately?" "Documents, maybe." The line went silent for so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. "How did you know?" he finally asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "I've had to replace my birth certificate twice. Some financial statements disappeared. I thought I was losing my mind." My stomach twisted. I think my mother has been entering your apartment." Michael mentioned something. I couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were too enormous, too horrifying. Richard was silent again, then let out a long breath. "Linda, we need to talk. Not over the phone. Can you meet me for lunch?" We agreed to meet at a cafe halfway between our workplaces at noon. As I hung up, my hand was shaking. For the first time, I was questioning everything I thought I knew about my mother. If she was capable of this violation, what else had she done? What else had I missed, or worse, enabled? I'll never forget what Richard showed me that day at the cafe. It would be the first domino in a long line of revelations that would eventually lead us to that courtroom, with my mother on her knees, screaming for her keys. When I arrived at Merton's Cafe at 12:15, Richard was already waiting, a manila folder on the table in front of him. He looked older than his 42 years, with new lines around his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. We ordered coffee, neither of us mentioning food, though it was lunchtime. When the waitress left, Richard slid the folder toward me. "I started keeping records about 3 years ago," he said quietly. "At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Then I realized something wasn't right." Inside the folder were dates, times, photographs, and notes, a meticulous documentation of what he called incidents, photos of my mother following him in her car, screenshots of emails sent from his account that he hadn't written, a list of items missing from his apartment that later mysteriously reappeared. "I installed a hidden camera 6 months ago," Richard said, pulling out his phone. He showed me footage of my mother entering his apartment using a key, rifling through his desk drawers, taking photographs of documents with her phone. My hands began to tremble so badly that coffee sloshed over the rim of my cup. "Why?" I whispered, though I already suspected the answer. "Information," Richard replied grimly. "Control. She's been trying to build a case against me. For what? I'm not entirely sure. But look at this." He pointed to dates on his log. Each incident coincided with a positive event in our co-parenting relationship, a family dinner we'd managed to have without arguing, a school event we'd both attended amicably. Any instance where Richard and I had shown signs of healing the rift between us. "She doesn't want us to reconcile," I said, the realization hitting me with physical force. "She never has." Richard nodded slowly. "Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think before you answer. Has your mother ever interfered with my communications with the kids? Phone calls that mysteriously didn't go through? Messages that weren't delivered?" As he spoke, Memories surfaced: Emma crying because Daddy didn't call on her birthday when Richard insisted he had. Michael's hurt when his father forgot to come to his baseball game, though Richard had shown up at the wrong field, claiming he'd been given incorrect information. Always, my mother had been the messenger, the one relaying information back and forth. Always, she had been present to comfort the children when Richard disappointed them. Oh God, I breathed, pressing my hands against my mouth. The pattern was suddenly so clear, so obvious, that I couldn't understand how I'd missed it. For years, my mother had been systematically sabotaging my relationship with Richard and undermining his relationship with our children. The divorce that I had believed was inevitable, even necessary, now seemed engineered. What do I do? I asked, looking up at Richard with tears blurring my vision. He reached across the table and took my hand. The first time he had touched me in years. We document everything, he said firmly, and you start paying very, very close attention to what's happening in your house. I nodded, squeezing his hand. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I didn't see it. His eyes softened slightly. You couldn't. She made sure of that. When I returned home that evening, I saw my house, my life, through new eyes. The children were at the kitchen table doing homework while Mom prepared dinner, humming the same tune she'd hummed throughout my childhood. Everything looked normal, safe, familiar. But now I noticed how Emma tensed slightly when Mom leaned over her shoulder to check her work. I saw how Michael glanced at his grandmother before answering my questions about his day, as if checking for approval. I observed the subtle ways Mom positioned herself physically between me and my children, a hand on Emma's shoulder, standing directly behind Michael's chair. Always there, always mediating, always controlling. How was work, Lindy? Mom asked, stirring something fragrant on the stove, just as she had thousands of times before. But now I heard the undercurrent in her voice, the fishing for information, the assessment of my mood, the slight emphasis on work that implied it was an indulgence, something that took me away from where I should be. Fine, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Actually, I ran into Richard today. I watched her carefully as I spoke, saw the momentary stillness in her, stirring before she resumed. Oh, she said lightly. What did he want? Not how is he? Or what a coincidence. What did he want? As if any interaction with him must have an agenda. Nothing in particular, I lied. We just chatted for a few minutes. Mom turned to face me fully, her expression concerned. You seem tense, dear. Was it upsetting seeing him? Before I could answer, she continued, you know how he affects you. Remember how anxious you were during the last years of your marriage, how you could barely sleep. I did remember the anxiety, the insomnia, but now I wondered about their true source. Had it been my failing marriage, or my mother's constant commentary on it? The subtle suggestions that Richard was disappointing me, neglecting me, that I deserved better. The convenient health emergencies whenever Richard and I seemed to be finding our way back to each other. I'm fine, Mom, I said, forcing a smile. Actually, I have a bit of a headache. I think I'll lie down before dinner. Her eyes narrowed slightly, so slightly I would have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. Poor dear, she said, crossing to me and pressing a cool hand to my forehead. You're a little warm. I hope you're not coming down with something. Always the suggestion of illness, of weakness, of my need for her care. I gently stepped back from her touch. I'm just tired. Call me when dinner's ready. As I walked upstairs, I felt her eyes following me. For the first time, the sensation made my skin crawl. In my bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it, heart hammering. How had I never noticed? How had I been so blind for so long? I moved to my dresser and opened the top drawer, reaching for the small journal I kept there, only to find it wasn't where I'd left it. In fact, now that I was paying attention, several things in my room seemed subtly out of place. The photo of Richard and the children that I kept tucked in my nightstand drawer was at a different angle. My personal laptop had been moved slightly. Someone had been in my room, looking through my things, and I knew exactly who that someone was. I took out my phone and texted Richard. You were right. Need to talk more. Tomorrow. His response came seconds later, 12:30. Same place. Then I did something I'd never done before. I locked my bedroom door. The small click of the lock sliding into place felt momentous, like the first act of rebellion in a lifetime of compliance. I sat on my bed, opened my phone's calendar app, and began creating a new, password-protected note. At the top, I typed, "Observations, Day 1. Then I started documenting everything I could remember from the past week, every inconsistency, every manipulation, every moment when Mom had inserted herself between me and my children or influenced their perception of their father. There was a soft knock at my door. "Lindy," Mom called, her voice honey-sweet with concern. "Dinner's ready, dear. Children are asking for you." I took a deep breath, saved my note, and unlocked the door. "Coming," I replied, sliding my phone into my pocket. As I followed her downstairs, I realized I was entering a battlefield I hadn't known existed. But now that I could see it, I would never be blind again. And I would do whatever it took to protect my children from the invisible war that had been raging in our home for years. I just didn't know yet how difficult and dangerous that fight would be. Dinner that night was a masterclass in subtle manipulation. I watched as Mom directed the entire conversation, skillfully cutting me off whenever I asked the children direct questions about their day. "Oh, Emma already told me about her science project while you were upstairs," she would say, patting Emma's hand. "It sounds wonderful, doesn't it?" Then she would launch into her version of Emma's day, while my daughter nodded along. When I asked Michael about his upcoming baseball game, Mom jumped in. "We might have to miss that one, right, Michael? Remember, we discussed possibly visiting Aunt Sarah that weekend." Michael looked confused. "We did," Mom laughed lightly. "Silly boy. Of course we did. Last Tuesday, remember?" She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Senior moments aren't just for seniors, it seems. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the times Mom had clarified my children's memories, small corrections that shaped their reality. How many times had she told them what they remembered, rather than asking them what they recalled? How often had she spoken for them, over them, instead of them? I lay awake until 3 a.m., making mental notes, connecting dots that had been there all along. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. I couldn't leave my children alone with her, not now that I was beginning to understand what was happening. "You don't look sick," Mom observed when I came downstairs in casual clothes instead of my work attire. There was an edge to her voice, a note of suspicion. I shrugged. "Just tired, thought I'd take a mental health day." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not like you, Lindy. You've always been so dedicated to your job." The criticism was veiled but clear. I was stepping out of the character she had assigned me. "Well, people change," I said, pouring myself coffee. "I thought I'd take the kids to school today, actually. Give you a break." Mom's hand tightened around her mug. "I don't need a break. The children and I have our routine." Emma looked up from her cereal, eyes darting between us with a wariness that broke my heart. At 11 years old, she was already expert at reading the emotional currents in our house, at navigating the invisible tensions. "I don't mind if Mom takes us," she said carefully. Mom's expression darkened momentarily before she forced a smile. "Well, if that's what you want, sweetheart." The way she said it made it clear that Emma's preference was a betrayal. I saw my daughter flinch slightly, then quickly backtrack. "But Grandma, you make the best lunches. Mom doesn't know how to cut the crusts the way I like." The relief on Emma's face when Mom's expression softened told me everything I needed to know about the emotional manipulation my children had been living with. "How about we all go together?" I suggested, trying to keep my voice light. "It's such a beautiful morning." Mom hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "I suppose that would be fine." In the car, I watched through the rearview mirror as she sat in the back seat between my children, her arms draped casually around their shoulders, marking her territory. When we arrived at the school, she insisted on walking them to the entrance, whispering something to each child before kissing them goodbye. As they disappeared into the building, she turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "They're such good children," she said. "We've raised them well. We, not you. We." After dropping Mom at her hair appointment, she'd insisted on scheduling it for that morning. Clearly unwilling to leave me alone in the house, I finally had 2 hours to myself. I drove straight home and headed for her bedroom, something I had never done in all the years she had lived with us. The invasion of privacy made my stomach churn with guilt, but I pushed through it. If she had been going through my things, reading my journal, accessing Richard's apartment, then the normal rules no longer applied. This wasn't about privacy anymore. This was about protection, my children's and my own. Mom's room was meticulously organized, everything in its place. Her closet contained clothes arranged by color and type, shoes perfectly aligned beneath them. Her dresser held neatly folded undergarments and nightwear. Nothing seemed unusual until I checked under her bed and found 3 locked storage boxes. I recognized them as the type sold at office supply stores, designed for file storage. Each had a small keyed lock, and I had a sinking feeling about where those keys might be hanging, prominently displayed in those shadow boxes in our entryway. I went downstairs and carefully removed the back panel of one of the shadow boxes, taking a small silver key that looked newer than the antique keys surrounding it. Back in Mom's room, I tried the key in each box. It fit the third one. Inside, I found folders labeled with our names: Linda, Richard, Emma, Michael. My hands trembled as I opened the one with my name. Inside were copies of my medical records, bank statements, emails I had sent to friends, pages from the journal I thought was private. There were photographs of me at places I hadn't known I was being photographed, having coffee with a colleague, shopping at the mall, sitting alone in my car in the parking lot at work. But most disturbing were the notes in my mother's handwriting, analyzing my behaviors, documenting my weaknesses, planning ways to guide my decisions. Richard's folder was even more extensive, detailed logs of his movements, transcripts of phone conversations with the children, copies of his financial records, even dating profiles he had created after our divorce. There were notes about potential leverage against him, including medical information I hadn't known about, a prescription for anxiety medication he had apparently started taking after our separation. The children's folders contained school records, medical information, and notes about their relationships with both Richard and me. Emma, still too attached to father, needs more guidance to see his flaws. Michael, becoming resistant to redirection regarding Richard, may need to create distance. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely return the folders to their original positions. This went beyond overprotective parenting or even controlling behavior. This was systematic surveillance, strategic manipulation, a deliberate campaign to isolate me and my children and bring us under my mother's complete control. I carefully locked the box, returned it to its place, and put the key back in the shadow box downstairs. Then, I sat on the living room couch and tried to stop the room from spinning around me. I had 30 minutes before I needed to pick Mom up from her appointment. 30 minutes to process what I had found and decide what to do next. I called Richard. When he answered, I could barely form words. "It's worse than we thought," I finally managed. "So much worse." I told him what I'd found, my voice breaking several times. He listened in silence, then said, "Take photos next time, document everything. But Linda, be careful. If she's gone this far, there's no telling what she might do if she feels threatened." The warning sent ice through my veins. This was my mother we were talking about, the woman who had raised me, who had supposedly devoted her life to my well-being. Could she actually be dangerous? Then, I remembered the detailed files, the surveillance photos, the calculated notes about using my children as pawns in her game, and I knew the answer was yes. The mother I thought I knew didn't exist. Perhaps she never had. I picked Mom up from her appointment at exactly 11:45, just as planned. Her hair had been freshly styled, and she was chatting animatedly with her stylist as I entered the salon. "Oh, here's my daughter now," she said, her voice warm with maternal pride. "Linda, Janet was just saying how lucky I am to live with my family. Not many mothers get to be so involved with their grandchildren's daily lives." The stylist nodded, smiling at me. "Your mom tells me you have quite the arrangement, 3 generations under one roof. So special in today's world." I forced a smile, wondering what else my mother had told this stranger about our special arrangement. On the drive home, Mom chattered about neighborhood gossip, upcoming school events, plans for the weekend, all the normal things that had previously felt like helpful involvement, but now rang alarm bells. Every suggestion contained a subtle direction. Every observation included an implied criticism. Every reference to the children emphasized her central role in their lives while minimizing mine. Michael asked me to help with his history project. I told him we could work on it this weekend while you catch up on your work. "You've seemed so distracted lately. Dear Dee, I thought you could use the time to yourself." Translation: I'll keep Michael occupied so you can't spend time with him alone. "Actually," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the road, I promised Michael I'd help with his project. He specifically asked me about the Civil War section yesterday. A lie, but a necessary one. Mom's smile tightened. Did he? He must have forgotten our conversation then. Children can be so forgetful. Her tone was light, but her fingers were digging into the strap of her purse. Well, perhaps we can all work on it together. Translation. I won't allow you unmonitored time with your son. I thought I might take the kids to see Richard this weekend, I said casually, making another turn toward our house. They've been missing him. This was a direct challenge, and I knew it. Mom went very still beside me. Oh, he just had them last weekend. It's not his scheduled time. I shrugged. I know, but I think it would be good for them. For all of us. Could feel her stare boring into the side of my face. All of us. Linda, what's going on? Have you been talking to Richard behind my back? The possessive phrasing behind my back, not without telling me, was telling, as if my communications with my children's father required her permission or oversight. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine before facing her. Mom, Richard is their father. Of course I talked to him. We co-parent. Her lips pressed into a thin line. After what he put you through. After how he abandoned this family. Linda, I'm concerned about your judgment lately. First missing work. Now this sudden interest in reconciliation with Richard. Are you feeling well? Her hand reached for my forehead. A gesture that had once felt caring but now seemed like an assertion of authority. I moved away from her touch, unbuckling my seatbelt. I'm fine, Mom. And Richard didn't abandon us. We divorced. There's a difference. I got out of the car before she could respond, but not before I saw the flash of calculation in her eyes. She was reassessing, recalibrating. I had deviated from the script, and now she needed a new approach. As I unlocked the front door, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The battle lines had been drawn, though only I knew it yet. My mother was a formidable opponent, and I had just declared war. That afternoon, I went to pick up the children from school alone, telling Mom I needed to stop at the pharmacy on the way and would be quicker without her. Another small assertion of independence that didn't go unnoticed. When I returned with Emma and Michael, Mom was on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. She hung up abruptly when we entered. Just talking to Aunt Sarah, she explained with a brightness that felt forced. She sends her love. I nodded, not believing her for a moment. Michael dropped his backpack on the floor and headed for the refrigerator. Mom, can I have a snack? Starving. Before I could answer, Mom interjected. I've already prepared your afternoon snack, Michael. It's on the counter. Your favorite cheese and crackers with apple slices. She moved between Michael and me, guiding him toward the carefully arranged plate. And Emma, I've set out your study materials in the dining room. You mentioned that math test tomorrow, and I thought we could review together. Emma's face fell slightly. Actually, Grandma, I was hoping Mom could help me. She's really good at explaining the formulas. Mom's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. Your mother has had such a long day, haven't you, Lindy? And you mentioned that headache earlier. I wouldn't want to burden you. The swift, subtle undermining took my breath away in one sentence. She had characterized me as fragile, positioned my involvement as a burden, and reminded Emma that I was somehow less available than she was, all while appearing concerned for my welfare. I'd seen her do this countless times before, but had never recognized the manipulation for what it was. My headache is gone, I said firmly, moving to stand beside Emma. I'd love to help with your math, sweetheart. I placed my hand on my daughter's shoulder, reclaiming my physical connection with her. Mom's expression flickered, surprise, then annoyance, quickly masked by solicitude. Well, if you're sure you're up to it, I'll just get dinner started then. She turned away, but not before I caught the calculating look she cast over her shoulder at us. Message received. This new assertiveness would not go unchallenged. For the next hour, I sat with Emma at the dining room table, working through her math problems. It felt wonderful to connect with my daughter without Mom's mediating presence, to watch her mind work, to hear her thoughts directly rather than filtered through my mother's interpretations. Mom moved around the kitchen, banging pots and pans with unnecessary force, sighing audibly, making her displeasure known without words. Twice she interrupted us with offers of snacks or reminders about other homework assignments. Each time, I politely declined her help and continued working with Emma. Michael joined us after finishing his snack, pulling out his history textbook. Mom, can you help me with this Civil War timeline? He asked. I smiled, moving my chair between my two children. Of course, let's take a look. From the kitchen, Mom called out, Michael, don't forget you promised to help me sort those old photographs tonight. Another fabricated commitment designed to separate us. Michael looked confused. I did. Mom appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. Yes, remember. For the family album I'm making, you said you wanted to pick which pictures of your father to include. The manipulation was so blatant now that I could see it, using Richard as bait, creating a false promise, making Michael question his own memory. I met her gaze, steadily. The photographs can wait, Mom. School comes first. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly before she forced a smile. Of course, dear, you're absolutely right. She retreated to the kitchen, but the tension lingering in the air was palpable. Emma and Michael exchanged glances, sensing the undercurrent, but not understanding its source. I squeezed both their hands under the table, a silent reassurance. We would get through this together. Dinner that night was tense, with Mom repeatedly steering the conversation toward topics that emphasized her central role in the family. Remember last summer when I took you both to the lake house? Emma, you caught your first fish, and I was the one who helped you bait the hook because your mother was afraid of the worms. Or, Michael, I was thinking we could plant those special tulip bulbs this weekend, the ones I ordered from Holland. It can be our special project. Each comment reinforced her bonds with my children while subtly diminishing mine. I watched Emma and Michael respond to these cues, automatically turning toward their grandmother, unconsciously mirroring her expressions and gestures. The evidence of her influence was everywhere, once I knew to look for it. After dinner, while the children were upstairs getting ready for bed, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. Lindy, what's going on with you? You've been acting strangely all day. Her tone was concerned, but her eyes were watchful, assessing. I kept my face neutral as I loaded the dishwasher. Nothing's going on, Mom. I'm just trying to be more present for the kids. She moved closer, lowering her voice. Is this about Richard? Has he been filling your head with ideas? You know how manipulative he can be. The irony of her accusation was almost laughable. Richard and I are just trying to co-parent effectively, I said, closing the dishwasher and turning it on. The mechanical hum filled the awkward silence between us. Mom studied my face, then sighed dramatically. I worry about you, Lindy. You've always been so susceptible, so eager to see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. She reached out to touch my cheek, a gesture that had once felt loving but now seemed possessive. I just don't want to see you hurt again. I stepped back from her touch. I appreciate your concern, Mom, but I'm a grown woman. I can make my own decisions. Something dark flickered behind her eyes, anger, fear. I couldn't tell, but her smile remained fixed in place. Of course you can, dear. I'm just trying to help. She turned away, but paused at the kitchen doorway. Oh, by the way, I took the liberty of calling Dr. Winters about that headache you mentioned. He can see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll pick the children up from school so you won't have to worry about that. My stomach tightened. Dr. Winters had been our family physician since I was a child. He and Mom had developed a friendly relationship over the years, often chatting about community events and mutual acquaintances during my appointments. How many times had she spoken to him about me without my knowledge? How many of my health concerns had she reported or perhaps exaggerated? I don't need to see Dr. Winters, I said firmly. And I'll pick up the children tomorrow. But thank you. Mom's smile didn't waver, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the doorframe. We'll see how you feel in the morning, she said lightly, as if I hadn't spoken. You know how these things can get worse overnight. That night, I tucked the children into bed myself, another break from routine. As Mom usually insisted on being the last person they saw before sleep, I sat on the edge of Emma's bed, brushing hair from her forehead. Mom, she asked hesitantly, are you and Grandma fighting? The question broke my heart. Of course she had noticed. Emma never missed emotional undercurrents. No, sweetheart, I said softly. Grandma and I just have different ideas sometimes, that's all. Emma nodded solemnly. She gets mad when people don't agree with her, even when she pretends not to be mad. Out of the mouths of babes. My 11-year-old daughter had seen what I had been blind to for decades. Emma, I said carefully, does Grandma ever tell you things about your dad that make you feel bad about him. Emma looked away, suddenly interested in a loose thread on her comforter. Sometimes, she admitted quietly, she says he doesn't really want to spend time with us, that he's just pretending because of the court. She says we shouldn't tell you because it would make you sad. My heart clenched. And do you believe her? Emma shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. I don't know. Dad seems like he wants to be with us, but Grandma says adults are good at pretending. I took a deep breath, fighting back tears. Emma, look at me, please. She raised her eyes reluctantly to mine. Your father loves you and Michael very much. He has always wanted to be with you. And from now on, I want you to tell me everything, okay? Even things Grandma says not to tell me. No more secrets in this family. Promise. Emma studied my face, then nodded slowly. Okay, Mom, I promise. I kissed her forehead, then moved to Michael's room to have a similar conversation. By the time I closed his door, my resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. My mother's manipulation of my children would end. I just wasn't sure yet how to end it without causing them more pain. As I passed Mom's room, I noticed her door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. I could hear her voice, low and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. She was on the phone again. I paused, listening, concerning behavior. Not herself. Richard's influence might need intervention. Fragments of conversation that chilled my blood. Who was she talking to? What intervention was she planning? I continued to my room as quietly as possible, closed the door, and for the second night in a row, locked it behind me. Sleep eluded me again that night. I lay awake, reviewing everything I'd discovered, planning my next steps. One thing was clear. I needed allies. Tomorrow I would meet Richard for lunch as planned, but I also needed to reach out to others. People who knew me, who might have seen what I'd been blind to. People who could corroborate my experiences if it came to that. Because a terrible suspicion was forming in my mind about who Mom had been calling, what stories she'd been telling, what groundwork she'd been laying. If I was right, the intervention she mentioned wouldn't be for my benefit, it would be to re-establish her control, and I needed to be prepared. Morning brought new tensions. Mom was unusually solicitous at breakfast, repeatedly asking how I'd slept, if my headache had returned, whether I was feeling like myself. Each question carried an undercurrent of suggestion that I wasn't well, that my behavior was concerning, that I needed her care. I answered each inquiry with deliberate normalcy, while observing how she subtly reinforced these suggestions to the children. Your mother seems tired this morning, doesn't she, Emma? Perhaps we should let her rest today, instead of bothering her with school pickup. The groundwork for isolation, laid with such practiced skill that it appeared as loving concern. I dropped the children at school, promising to see them at pickup time despite Mom's protests that she had already planned to go. Then I drove to work. Needing the normalcy of my office, the perspective of being away from her influence, Dean Anderson noticed my distraction immediately. Linda, is everything all right? You seem tense. I hesitated, then made a decision. Dean had known me for nearly a decade. He had met my mother at office functions, had observed our interactions. Actually, I said, closing his office door, I could use some objective input. For the next 20 minutes, outlined some of what I'd discovered, watching his expression shift from concern to alarm. Linda, he said when I finished, what you're describing sounds like classic narcissistic control. I've seen something similar with my sister-in-law. He leaned forward, his expression grave. But if your mother has been doing this for your entire life, she won't give up easily. People like that can become dangerous when their control is threatened. The word dangerous sent a chill through me. Dean must have seen it on my face because he added, not necessarily physically dangerous, though that's possible too, but she might escalate in other ways. Legal action, smear campaigns, attempts to turn your children against you. What would you suggest? I asked. Grateful for his candor, Dean thought for a moment. Document everything. Get your children into therapy with someone who specializes in family dynamics. They'll need help processing this too. And consider legal steps to establish boundaries. He paused, then added gently, Linda, you might need to ask your mother to move out eventually. Are you prepared for that? The question hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, the thought of confronting my mother, of severing that lifelong bond, was terrifying, but I nodded slowly. If that's what it takes to protect my children, yes. At 12:20, I met Richard at the cafe as planned. His face was grim as I slid into the booth across from him. I spoke to my attorney this morning, he said without preamble. Based on what you found, we might have grounds for emergency custody modification and a restraining order against your mother. My stomach dropped. A restraining order? Richard, she's their grandmother. Despite everything, they love her. He reached across the table, his expression softening slightly. I know this is hard, Linda, but think about what she's doing to them. The manipulation, the lies, using them as pawns. That's not love, it's control. And it's damaging them. I knew he was right, but the reality was overwhelming. What about the apartment key? I asked, changing the subject slightly. Are you going to change the locks? Richard nodded. Already done. And I've installed better security cameras. But Linda, he hesitated, then continued reluctantly. There's something else you should know. I got a call from Dr. Winters this morning, asking about your mental state. He said your mother had contacted him with concerns about erratic behavior, paranoia, possibly a nervous breakdown. The room seemed to tilt around me. She's setting me up, I whispered, the realization crystallizing. She's creating a narrative that I'm unstable. If I confront her, if I try to set boundaries, Richard completed my thought. She use it as evidence that you're having a breakdown. Classic gaslighting. Make you seem crazy for noticing the abuse. He squeezed my hand. This is why we need to move quickly. Document everything. Get witness statements if possible. Build a case before she can build hers. We spent the next hour planning, with Richard taking detailed notes. We would need statements from the children, carefully obtained without leading questions. Witness accounts from people who had observed Mom's behavior over the years. Documentation of her unauthorized entry into Richard's apartment and her surveillance activities. And most critically, evidence of her deliberate alienation of the children from their father. By the time we finished our coffee, we had the outline of a strategy. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I'll contact a family therapist I know, Richard said as we prepared to leave. Someone who specializes in cases like this. The kids will need support through this process. I nodded, grateful for his practical approach. And Linda, he added, his voice softening, you'll need support too. This won't be easy. For a moment, I glimpsed the man I had married, thoughtful, caring, protective. I wondered briefly how much of our divorce had been engineered by my mother's invisible hand, how different our lives might have been without her constant interference. But that was water under the bridge. Now we needed to focus on protecting our children from further manipulation. As I drove back to work, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Mrs. Pearson, this is Dr. Winters' office. The doctor was expecting you at 2 p.m. today. Should we reschedule? My mother had made the appointment anyway, despite my clear refusal. There must be a misunderstanding, I said carefully. I didn't schedule an appointment. The receptionist sounded confused. Oh, your mother was quite specific. She said you've been experiencing severe headaches and unusual behavior. Dr. Winters wanted to see you right away, the groundwork being laid, piece by piece. Please tell Dr. Winters I'm fine, I said firmly. And in the future, I'll make my own appointments. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of work and planning. At 3 p.m. sharp, I left to pick up the children from school, determined to keep my promise to them. As I pulled into the school parking lot, my heart sank. Mom's car was already there, parked in the pickup line. She had gone behind my back again, ignoring my stated intention to collect the children myself. I parked and walked toward the school entrance, spotting her immediately, silver hair perfectly coiffed, designer handbag over her arm, the picture of the devoted grandmother. She saw me approaching and frowned slightly before composing her features into a smile. Lindy, what a surprise. I thought you'd be at Dr. Winters' office by now. Her voice carried just enough for nearby parents to hear, creating witnesses to my missed appointment. To my forgetfulness, I forced a calm expression. I told you I didn't need to see Dr. Winters' mom, and that I would pick up the children today. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. Did you? I must have misunderstood. Senior moment, I suppose. The self-deprecating chuckle, the harmless elderly woman act that she performed so convincingly for others. The school doors opened, and children began streaming out. Emma spotted us first, her expression faltering momentarily at seeing both of us waiting. Michael barreled past her, running straight to me for a hug. Mom, you came. The simple joy in his voice made my throat tight. How often had my mother convinced him I wouldn't show up? How many disappointments had she manufactured to weaken his trust in me? Of course I came, I said, holding him close. I promised, didn't I? Over his head, I met Mom's gaze. Something passed between us, a recognition, perhaps, that the rules of engagement had changed. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly before she turned to Emma, arms outstretched. There's my girl. How is your math test? The deliberate division of the children, Michael to me, Emma to her. Another subtle manipulation I might have missed before. Let's all go home together, I suggested, keeping my voice light for the children's sake. We can stop for ice cream on the way. Mom's lips pursed slightly. Oh, I don't think that's a good idea. Lindy, you mentioned that headache, and you seem agitated. Why don't I take the children home, and you can have some time to yourself? Perhaps see Dr. Winters as planned. Again, the concerned suggestions of my instability, my need for medical intervention, all within earshot of other parents, creating witnesses, building her case. I'm feeling perfectly fine, I said firmly, putting an arm around each child. And I'd like to spend time with my children. Emma looked between us anxiously, sensing the tension. Michael, less perceptive, simply bounced with excitement at the mention of ice cream. Mom's expression darkened momentarily before she forced another smile. Well, if you're sure you're up to it, I'll follow in my car, shall I? Just in case you start feeling unwell. The implied threat was clear. She would be watching, documenting, ready to step in at any sign of what she could characterize as unstable behavior. I nodded stiffly. Fine, we'll meet you at home after ice cream. As we walked to my car, I felt her eyes boring into my back. The children chattered excitedly about their day, oblivious to the silent battle being waged around them. But as I helped them buckle in, I caught Emma watching me with an expression knowing for her 11 years, she had sensed something was wrong, something beyond the ordinary tensions of family life. I smiled reassuringly at her, but the worry in her eyes remained. My daughter was carrying a burden no child should have to bear, the weight of adult conflict, the pressure to navigate divided loyalties. I silently vowed to free her from that burden, no matter what it took. At the ice cream parlor, I watched my children laugh and debate flavors, momentarily free from Mom's influence. These precious moments of normalcy were what I was fighting for, the right for them to be children, unburdened by adult manipulation. As Michael gleefully created a towering sundae and Emma carefully selected her toppings, I snapped photos with my phone, documenting their joy, their innocence, evidence of my competent mothering. Yes, but more importantly, a reminder of what was at stake. When we arrived home, Mom was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, her posture relaxed as we approached. Another seamless shift in presentation. Did you save any ice cream for me? She asked playfully, but I caught the edge beneath her words, the implied criticism of my indulgence of the children. They bounded up the steps, showing off their empty bowls, describing their choices in excited detail. Mom listened attentively, exclaiming appropriately, playing the role of doting grandmother to perfection. Inside, she moved efficiently through her after-school routine, checking homework, preparing snacks, gently steering the children toward their designated activities. I observed from the doorway, seeing with new clarity how she positioned herself physically between me and them at every opportunity, how she redirected their attention whenever they turned to me, how she subtly reinforced her central role in their lives with every interaction. It was masterful, this orchestration of control, invisible unless you knew to look for it. Mom, I said as casually as I could manage, I need to speak with you privately for a moment. Her eyes flicked to mine, wary but composed. Of course, dear children, why don't you start on your homework? I'll be right back. We moved to the kitchen, and I closed the door behind us. My heart was hammering, but I kept my voice steady. I've decided to take the children to stay with Richard for a few days. It was a test, a small assertion of my parental authority, a deliberate disruption of her control. The change in her was immediate and chilling. Her face hardened, the mask of maternal concern slipping to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. That is absolutely out of the question, she said, her voice low but intense. The children need stability, routine, and frankly, Linda, I'm concerned about your judgment lately. These mood swings, this impulsivity, it's not like you. She stepped closer, her voice softening into concern, though her eyes remained hard. I think you need help, dear. Professional help. Dr. Winters agrees with me. There it was. The trap being sprung. Any resistance on my part would be framed as evidence of instability. Any assertion of my rights as a parent would be characterized as mood swings or impulsivity. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. The children have two parents, Mom. Richard and I have agreed that they'll spend some extra time with him this week. It's already decided. I moved toward the door, signaling that the discussion was over. Mom's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. This is Richard's doing, isn't it? He's always been jealous of our bond, always tried to come between us. And now he's manipulating you, turning you against me. Can't you see that, Lindy? The irony of her accusation was breathtaking. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. The children will be staying with Richard for a few days, I repeated. They'll pack tomorrow after school. Her expression shifted again, fury, replaced by a calculating look that was somehow more frightening. Well, if that's what you've decided, she said, her voice suddenly calm, reasonable. Of course, I'll need the keys to Richard's new place so I can check on them, make sure they're settling in properly. The audacity of the request momentarily stunned me. Even now, she was trying to maintain control, to establish access. Richard changed his locks, I said flatly, and the children will be fine with their father. Something dangerous flashed in her eyes before she composed her features. I see, she said softly. Well, we'll discuss this more later, when you're feeling more yourself. The implication was clear. This version of me, assertive, boundary setting, wasn't the real me. The real me was compliant, easily manipulated, under her control. She brushed past me into the living room, immediately embracing her grandmother persona again. Who needs help with homework? Grandma's here. That evening was a masterclass in passive-aggressive behavior. Mom was exaggeratedly solicitous toward the children, making pointed comments about spending quality time while we can and making memories before changes happen. She repeatedly drew them into whispered conversations that stopped when I approached, creating an atmosphere of secrets and exclusion. At dinner, she reminisced about times she had saved the day when Richard or I had dropped the ball, subtly undermining our parental competence. And all the while, she watched me with that calculating gaze, assessing my reactions, documenting my responses. After the children were in bed, she confronted me again, this time with a different approach. Lindy, I've been thinking, she said, her voice gentle, reasonable. I'm concerned that you might be experiencing some delayed trauma response from your divorce. It's not uncommon, you know. People can seem fine for years, and then suddenly, well, things can change. She sat beside me on the couch, reaching for my hand. I let her take it, watching this performance with a detachment that felt new and necessary. I've taken the liberty of scheduling an appointment with Dr. Winters for myself tomorrow. I thought I could discuss my concerns about you, get his professional opinion on what might be happening. The trap was being laid with exquisite care. If I objected, I would appear paranoid, defensive. If I agreed, I would be accepting her characterization of me as unstable. I chose a third path. That's your choice, Mom. But I'm not experiencing any trauma response. I'm simply setting appropriate boundaries for our family. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around mine. Boundaries, she repeated, as if the word itself was evidence of my instability. Lindy, families don't need boundaries. Not loving families. Boundaries suggest distance, separation. Is that really what you want? To separate yourself from the person who has always been there for you, who has sacrificed everything for you. The emotional manipulation was so familiar, the invocation of her sacrifices, the implication that love meant boundaryless access, the subtle guilt trip. I had responded to these tactics my entire life with compliance, with gratitude for her devotion, with a renewed commitment to meeting her needs, but not anymore. Yes, I said simply, withdrawing my hand from hers. Healthy families do have boundaries, and I'm establishing some for ours. I stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. Good night, Mom. I went to my room and locked the door, then called Richard to update him on the situation. She's escalating faster than I expected, he said, his voice tense. Linda, I'm worried about the children. If she's willing to go to these lengths with you, what might she do with them? The question sent ice through my veins. I hadn't considered that she might use the children more directly in her campaign to maintain control. Should we move up the timeline? I asked. Have them come to you tomorrow instead of waiting? Richard was silent for a moment, then said, yes, I'll pick them up from school myself. But Linda, what about you? Will you be safe there alone with her? The question caught me off guard. Would I be safe? This was my mother we were talking about, not some stranger. But then I remembered the files, the surveillance, the calculated manipulations spanning decades. I remembered the cold look in her eyes when I challenged her authority. I'll be fine, I said, with more confidence than I felt. She won't risk doing anything that could be used against her legally at least. I hoped she wouldn't. We agreed on a plan. Richard would collect the children from school the next day, and I would begin gathering the evidence we needed from Mom's room while she was at her doctor's appointment. That night, I slept fitfully, waking at every small noise. At one point, I thought I heard movement outside my door. The soft creak of the floorboard, a gentle testing of my doorknob. I lay perfectly still, listening, but whatever I had heard didn't repeat. Morning came, with a sense of foreboding. Mom was unusually quiet at breakfast, watching me with an evaluative gaze as I prepared the children for school. I made their lunches myself, another break from routine that didn't go unnoticed. You didn't cut the crusts off Michael's sandwich, Mom observed. He doesn't eat the crusts, you know that. Actually, Mom, Michael piped up, I do eat crusts now. I told you that weeks ago. Mom's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Did you? I don't recall that, sweetie. Are you sure you told Grandma and not someone else? The subtle questioning of his memory, the redirection of any contradiction, classic gaslighting techniques applied to an 8-year-old. I met her gaze steadily as I finished packing the lunches. The crusts are fine, Mom. Michael knows what he likes. A small assertion of my son's autonomy, of my trust in his self-knowledge. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line before she forced another smile. As we prepared to leave for school, Mom announced casually, I'll be out for a few hours this morning, errands and my appointment with Dr. Winters. I should be back around noon to prepare lunch. She gave me a meaningful look. Perhaps you could take the day off, Lindy. Rest a bit. You still seem not quite yourself. The concern in her voice was perfectly modulated, the worried maternal tone practiced and convincing. I nodded noncommittally. We'll see how the morning goes. Have a good appointment, Mom. I drove the children to school, my mind racing with plans and contingencies. At the drop-off line, I hugged them both tightly. Dad's going to pick you up today, I said, keeping my voice casual. He wants to spend some extra time with you this week. Emma's eyes widened in surprise, while Michael bounced excitedly. Really? Awesome. Emma was more perceptive. Does Grandma know? She asked quietly. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. Grandma and I have different ideas about some things right now, Emma. But what's most important is that you and Michael are happy and safe. Do you understand? She nodded slowly, her eyes to knowing for her age. Is that why you and Grandma are fighting? We're not fighting, sweetheart, I said gently. We're just figuring some things out. But I don't want you to worry about it. Dad and I are handling everything. I hugged her again, wishing I could protect her completely from the emotional complexities of the situation. Just have a good day at school, okay? And be excited about seeing Dad later. She nodded against my shoulder, then pulled back with a small smile. Okay, Mom, I love you. My heart clenched. I love you too, Emma, so much. After dropping them off, I called my office to request another day off, citing a family emergency. Then I drove home, steeling myself for the task ahead. The house was quiet. When I entered, Mom, already gone to her appointment. I went straight to her room and began a more thorough search of the locked boxes I had found earlier. This time, I took photos of everything, the surveillance notes, the manipulated communications, the detailed logs of Richard's movements, the strategies for alienating the children from their father. I documented the contents of each folder meticulously, knowing we would need this evidence if the situation escalated to legal action. In the third box, buried beneath the personal files, I found something unexpected, legal documents including a partially completed guardianship petition. My hands trembled as I read through the forms. Mom had been preparing to seek legal guardianship of Emma and Michael, building a case that Richard and I were both unfit parents. The petition cited my mental instability and Richard's neglect, both fabricated with twisted versions of real events and selective documentation. She had been laying this groundwork for months, possibly years, collecting evidence, manipulating perceptions, creating a narrative that would allow her to gain legal control of my children. The discovery left me physically ill. I sank onto her bed, photos clutched in my shaking hands, as the full scope of her betrayal became clear. This wasn't just controlling behavior or difficulty letting go. This was a deliberate, calculated campaign to take my children from me, to sever their relationship with their father, to position herself as the only stable presence in their lives. And she had nearly succeeded. If I hadn't found Richard's key in her collection, if we hadn't started comparing notes, if I hadn't begun to see through her manipulations, how much longer would it have been before she filed these papers? Before she used her carefully cultivated relationships with doctors, teachers, and neighbors to support her claims? I carefully photographed every page of the guardianship petition, then returned everything to its place, relocking the boxes and replacing the key in the shadow box downstairs. Then I called Richard. "It's worse than we thought," I said when he answered. "She's been planning to seek legal guardianship of the children. She has documentation, witnesses, everything." Richard's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Linda, you need to get out of there now. Pack what you need and come to my place. We'll figure out next steps together." The urgency in his voice made my decision clear. I quickly packed a suitcase with essential clothing and personal items, then gathered important documents, birth certificates, insurance information, financial records. As I was zipping the suitcase, I heard the front door open. Mom was home, hours earlier than expected. My heart began to race as her footsteps moved through the house, coming closer to the stairs. "Linda," she called, her voice honey-sweet with concern. "Are you home, dear? Your car is in the driveway." I took a deep breath, composing myself. There was no way to hide the packed suitcase or explain it away. Confrontation was inevitable now. "I'm upstairs, Mom," I called back, keeping my voice steady. "I'll be down in a minute." I quickly texted Richard. "She's home early. May need backup." His response was immediate. "On my way. Stay calm. Don't reveal what you know unless necessary." I slipped my phone into my pocket and moved to the top of the stairs, leaving the suitcase out of sight in my room. Mom stood in the entryway, looking up at me with an expression of studied concern. "Lindy, I'm so glad you're home. Dr. Winters and I had a long talk about you. He's very worried, dear." "We both are." She moved toward the stairs, one hand extended in a gesture that might have appeared loving to an observer but now seemed predatory to me. "He thinks you might be experiencing a psychological break of some kind. The sudden changes in behavior, the paranoia, the impulsivity, these are all warning signs." "Sweetheart," I remained at the top of the stairs, maintaining physical distance between us. "I'm not having a psychological break, Mom. I'm seeing clearly for the first time in years." Her expression shifted, hardening briefly before rearranging itself into maternal worry. "Oh, Lindy, that's exactly what someone in your condition would say. You don't recognize that you're ill, but we can help you. Dr. Winters has suggested a short stay at Lakeside just for evaluation, just to make sure you're okay. I've already spoken to Richard about taking the children temporarily while you get the help you need." The brazen lie took my breath away. She was accelerating her plan, creating a crisis to force me into a psychiatric facility while she implemented her guardianship strategy. And she was confident enough in her manipulation that she believed I would accept this narrative, that I would doubt my own perceptions, that I would comply as I always had before. "You haven't spoken to Richard," I said flatly. "And I'm not going to Lakeside or anywhere else. In fact, Mom, I think it's time for you to find your own place to live. This arrangement isn't working anymore." The mask slipped completely then. Mom's face contorted with rage, her eyes cold and calculating. "You ungrateful child," she hissed, dropping all pretense of concern. "After everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed, you think you can just dismiss me? You think you can manage without me? You've never been able to function without my guidance, my support. You're weak, Lindy. You always have been. That's why Richard left you. That's why your children prefer me to you. They know who the real mother figure is in this house." Each word was designed to wound, to undermine, to reinforce decades of carefully constructed dependence. 6 months ago, they might have worked. 6 months ago, I might have crumbled under the weight of her disapproval, might have begged forgiveness for my ingratitude, might have recommitted myself to meeting her needs at the expense of my own, but not anymore. The children are with Richard now, I said calmly. He picked them up from school an hour ago, and they won't be coming back to this house until you're gone. The rage that crossed her face was terrifying in its intensity. You had no right, she screamed, abandoning all pretense of rationality. Those are my grandchildren. I've raised them since they were born. I'm more their mother than you ever were. She started up the stairs toward me, her movements jerky with fury. You think Richard wants them. He's just using them to hurt me, to punish me for seeing through him from the beginning. He's always been jealous of our bond, always tried to come between us. And now you're letting him. After everything I've done. I stood my ground, though my heart was hammering in my chest. Richard is their father, Mom. He loves them. And I'm their mother. We're their parents, not you. She was halfway up the stairs now, her face contorted with a rage I had never seen before. Give me the keys to his place, she demanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Now, Linda, the children need me. They'll be lost without me, confused, frightened. I need to go to them to explain what's happening, to make sure they're not being poisoned against me. She held out her hand, palm up, expectant. The keys, Lindy. Now. Richard changed the locks, I said again, taking a step back as she reached the top of the stairs. And even if he hadn't, you have no right to enter his home, no right to interfere with his parenting time, no right to manipulate my children any further. Mom's face went eerily still, her eyes narrowing to slits. His home, his parenting time, his children. Listen to yourself, Linda. He's turned you against me completely. She moved closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. But it won't work. I've prepared for this. I've documented your instability for months. The missed appointments, the mood swings, the paranoia. By the time I'm finished, you'll be lucky if you get supervised visitation with my grandchildren. The threat was explicit now, the mask completely discarded. This was the real Eleanor Pearson, calculating, vengeful, willing to destroy her own daughter to maintain control over her grandchildren. I took another step back, maintaining distance between us. It's over, Mom. We have evidence of everything. Your unauthorized entry into Richard's department, your deliberate alienation of the children, your attempts to undermine my relationship with them, your plans for guardianship. It's all documented. If you try to pursue this, if you try to take my children, everything will come out in court. For a moment, doubt flickered across her face, the first time I had ever seen her confidence waver. Then her expression hardened again. No one will believe you, she said coldly. Who would believe that a devoted grandmother, a pillar of the community, would do such things? They'll see a mentally unstable woman making wild accusations against the mother who has sacrificed everything for her. The mother who stepped in to provide stability when she couldn't cope with divorce, with single parenthood. The mother who has been the primary caregiver for those children while you pursued your career, your independence. Her voice dripped with contempt on the last word, as if my desire for autonomy was a moral failing. We'll see, I said, simply, turning to go back to my room, to get my suitcase. I couldn't stay in this house another minute. Couldn't continue this confrontation that was only reinforcing the toxicity I had lived with for decades. Mom grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. Where do you think you're going? She demanded. This isn't over, Lindy. Far from it. I pulled my arm from her grasp, unable to completely hide my revulsion at her touch. It is over, Mom. I'm leaving, and when I come back, it will be with a formal eviction notice if necessary. Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. You wouldn't dare. This house is as much mine as yours. I've lived here for 9 years. I've made it a home for those children while you were too busy, too self-absorbed to be the mother they needed. I shook my head, tired of the manipulation, the twisted narratives. The house is in my name, Mom. The mortgage is in my name. You have no legal right to be here if I ask you to leave. I turned away again, moving toward my bedroom door. And I'm asking you to leave. She followed me, her rage building visibly. You think you can just throw me away? After everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed. She was practically vibrating with fury now, her control slipping completely. I gave up my life for you, Linda. My career, my relationships, everything. And this is how you repay me. By believing Richard's lies. By turning against your own mother. I grabbed my suitcase, brushing past her toward the stairs. Her hand shot out, catching the suitcase strap, trying to wrench it from my grasp. You're not going anywhere until we resolve this. The struggle was brief but intense. I pulled the suitcase free and started down the stairs, Mom following close behind, her voice rising to a shriek. If you walk out that door, if you choose him over me, don't think you'll ever see those children again. I'll make sure of it. I'll tell them how you abandoned them, how you chose your own selfish needs over their welfare. I'll make sure they never trust you again. Each threat was more desperate than the last, each revealing more clearly the true nature of her love, conditional, controlling, fundamentally selfish. At the bottom of the stairs, I turned to face her one last time. That's the difference between us, Mom. I want Emma and Michael to be healthy, independent people who make their own choices. You want them dependent on you, controlled by you, existing to meet your needs. That's not love, that's ownership. Her face contorted with rage again, but before she could respond, the front door opened. Richard stood there, taking in the scene with a quick glance. Mom's fury, my packed suitcase, the obvious confrontation. Everything okay here? He asked quietly, his gaze steady on my face. Mom whirled toward him, pointing an accusing finger. This is all you're doing. You've poisoned her against me, turned my own daughter against me. Richard remained calm, his voice level. Eleanor Linda called me because she was concerned for her safety. I'm here to make sure she can leave without the situation escalating further. His reasonable tone seemed to infuriate Mom even more. Leave. She's not leaving. This is her home. Our home. You have no right to be here, to interfere in our family. Mom, I said firmly, moving to stand beside Richard, I am leaving now. When I've had some time to think, to process everything, we can discuss next steps. But I can't stay here with you anymore. Her expression shifted from rage to calculated desperation. Lindy, please, she said, her voice suddenly soft, pleading. Don't do this. Don't let him come between us again. We can work this out, just the two of us. Family is everything. Remember, family is forever. The familiar refrain, the emotional manipulation that had worked so effectively for so long, now rang hollow. Goodbye, Mom, I said simply, walking past Richard to his waiting car. Behind me, I heard her voice rise again, furious threats mingling with tearful pleas, the dual tactics of the manipulator whose senses control slipping away. Richard followed me, closing the door on her continuing tirade. In the sudden quiet of the car, I let out a long, shaky breath. Thank you for coming, I whispered. He nodded, starting the engine. The kids are with my sister, he said quietly. They're safe. And now you are too. As we drove away from the house that had become a prison of manipulation, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, grief, fear, determination. The confrontation with Mom had been ugly, revealing a darkness I had always sensed but never fully acknowledged. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be legal battles, emotional fallout, difficult conversations with the children. Mom would not surrender her control without fighting with every weapon at her disposal, and she had many, cultivated over decades of manipulation and strategic relationship building. But for the first time in my life, I was seeing clearly, acting independently, prioritizing my children's well-being over my mother's demands. And that clarity, that independence, felt like the first breath of air after a lifetime of slow suffocation. 3 weeks later, we found ourselves in that courtroom. Richard, the children, me, and my mother. The legal proceedings had moved quickly once our attorney presented evidence of Mom's unauthorized entry into Richard's apartment, her deliberate parental alienation tactics, and her attempts to seek guardianship under false pretenses. The judge had granted a temporary restraining order while the case proceeded, preventing Mom from contacting us or the children. But today was the hearing that would determine longer-term arrangements, and Mom had come armed with her own attorney, character witnesses, and a performance of wounded grandmotherly concern that might have been convincing if we hadn't had such overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Throughout the proceedings, Mom maintained her composure, presenting herself as the concerned mother and grandmother who had sacrificed everything for her family's well-being. Her attorney portrayed her as the stabilizing force in the children's lives, the primary caregiver who had stepped in when I was unable to cope with the demands of single parenthood. Teachers testified to her involvement in school activities, neighbors to her apparent devotion to Emma and Michael. It was a masterful performance, and I could see some faces in the courtroom softening toward her, believing the narrative she had crafted so carefully over the years. Then our attorney presented the evidence: photographs of Mom entering Richard's apartment without permission, copies of her surveillance notes, witness statements from friends who had observed her manipulation firsthand, and most damning of all, her own handwritten plans for seeking guardianship of the children based on fabricated concerns about my mental health. As each piece of evidence was presented, Mom's composure began to crack. Her attorney objected repeatedly, trying to exclude various documents, but Judge Calloway overruled most objections, allowing the full picture to emerge. The turning point came when the judge asked to see the keys that had been mentioned repeatedly in testimony, the keys to Richard's apartment that Mom had used without authorization. Mom's attorney stammered that they weren't available, that they had been lost, but our attorney produced photographs of the key collection, showing the modern key with its distinctive blue tag among the antique keys Mom displayed so prominently in our home. "And can you explain, Mrs. Pearson," the judge asked directly, "why you had a key to your former son-in-law's apartment without his knowledge or consent? A key that, according to witness testimony, you used repeatedly to enter his home while he was absent." Mom rose from her seat, her face flushed with indignation. "Those keys are mine," she screamed, the careful facade of composed concern crumbling completely. "She stole them. Margaret, tell them what you did." Her finger pointed at me like a weapon, shaking with each accusation. The courtroom went silent, 63 pairs of eyes fixed on the spectacle of my mother's meltdown. I felt the weight of those stares, including my children's. The shame was suffocating, but I remained silent, letting her words hang in the air, revealing the truth of her character more effectively than any testimony could have done. Judge Calloway simply slid a single piece of paper across his bench. The bailiff carried it to my mother, and as she read those 12 lines of text, a summary of the evidence against her, including her own admissions during depositions, I watched the blood drain from her face. She looked up at me, then back at the paper, and whispered, "I didn't know," but she did know. She had always known, and now everyone else would know too. The judge's ruling was unequivocal. The restraining order against Mom would continue for 1 year, with any violation resulting in potential criminal charges. She was ordered to vacate my home within 72 hours, with police supervision if necessary. Most importantly, she was prohibited from any unsupervised contact with Emma and Michael until a court-appointed therapist determined such contact would not be detrimental to their well-being. As the judge read these terms, Mom sat motionless, her earlier rage replaced by a cold, calculating stillness that was somehow more disturbing. Outside the courtroom, Richard placed a protective arm around me as we walked the children to the car. Emma looked back once at the courthouse steps, where Mom stood watching us, her expression unreadable from a distance. "Will Grandma be okay?" my daughter asked quietly. The question broke my heart. Even after everything, Emma's capacity for compassion remained intact. "Grandma will be fine," I assured her, though I wasn't certain it was true. "She needs some time to figure things out, just like we all do." Michael was more subdued, processing the events in his 8-year-old way. "She said mean things about you and Dad," he observed, his small face serious, in the courtroom. "Why would she do that?" I exchanged a glance with Richard over the children's heads, silently negotiating how much to share. "Sometimes," Richard said carefully, "adults get confused about the best way to show love. Grandma loves you both very much, but she got confused about how to show that love in a healthy way." It was a simplified explanation, but it would do for now. The deeper conversations would come later, with the help of the therapist we had already engaged. The weeks that followed were challenging but healing. With police supervision, Mom removed her belongings from my home, maintaining a rigid silence throughout the process. I discovered later that she had moved to Florida, to be near her sister Sarah. Whether for support or to escape the consequences of her actions, I couldn't say. The children asked about her occasionally, their questions becoming less frequent as new routines were established. As the atmosphere in our home gradually lightened without the weight of her manipulation, Richard and I developed a new co-parenting relationship, free from the interference that had poisoned our interactions for years. We weren't reconciling romantically, too much damage had been done for that, but we were rediscovering the mutual respect and shared goals that had once been the foundation of our relationship. The children thrived in this new environment of transparency and cooperation, gradually learning to trust their own perceptions, to express their needs directly, to navigate relationships without the toxic triangulation that had been their norm. As for me, I began the long process of recognizing and healing from a lifetime of manipulation. Through therapy, I came to understand the patterns that had shaped me, the conditional love, the enmeshment, the subtle erosion of boundaries and autonomy. I learned to identify the voice in my head that wasn't my own but my mother's, critical, demanding, invalidating. And slowly, I began to replace that voice with my own, kinder, more accepting, focused on growth rather than control. 6 months after the courtroom confrontation, I received a letter from Mom, the first contact since that day. It was not an apology but a justification, a carefully crafted narrative portraying herself as the victim of misunderstanding, of others' jealousy of her special bond with me and the children. She expressed hope that I would come to my senses and restore her to her rightful place in our lives. Reading it, I felt a momentary pull of the old guilt, the old obligation, but then I recognized the manipulation for what it was, and filed the letter away without responding. Perhaps someday there would be a possibility of a healthier relationship, with proper boundaries and mutual respect, but that day was not today, and I would not sacrifice my children's well-being, or my own hard-won freedom, for the illusion of family peace. 1 year after Mom left, Emma asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. "Mom, do you think I'll be like Grandma when I grow up?" We were in the kitchen baking cookies, the real ones with crusts intact, the way Michael actually preferred them. I set down the rolling pin and turned to face my daughter fully. "What makes you ask that, Emma?" She shrugged, her eyes on the dough she was shaping. "Sometimes I catch myself doing things she would do, checking up on Michael, telling him what he thinks instead of asking. It scares me." I took her flour-dusted hands in mine. "The fact that you noticed those behaviors, that you question them, already makes you different from Grandma," I said gently. "We all have patterns we learn from our families, some healthy, some not. The key is being aware of them, choosing which ones to keep and which to change." Emma nodded slowly, considering this. "So I'm not doomed to repeat her mistakes." The question revealed how deeply she had been thinking about these issues, how aware she was at 12 years old of the patterns that had shaped our family. "Absolutely not," I assured her. "We always have choices, Emma, always. And being conscious of those patterns is the first step to making better choices." That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she hugged me tightly. "I'm glad you're my mom," she whispered. "The real you, not the you Grandma tried to make you be." Tears pricked my eyes as I held her close. "I'm glad too, sweetheart, so very glad." In that moment, I knew with certainty that breaking free from my mother's control had been worth every difficult step, every painful revelation, every moment of uncertainty. My children would grow up knowing real love, not the controlling, conditional version that masqueraded as love in my childhood, but the genuine article that respects autonomy, encourages growth, and allows for the messy, beautiful complexity of authentic human connection. If you're listening to my story and something feels familiar, the subtle manipulations, the blurred boundaries, the conditional love wrapped in sacrificial language, please know you're not alone. Take a moment right now and ask yourself, when was the last time you made a decision without considering someone else's reaction first? When did you last trust your own perception without seeking validation? These questions were revolutionary for me, the first steps toward reclaiming my autonomy, my identity, my life. If you recognize yourself or someone you care about in my story, share this with them. Sometimes naming the pattern is the first step to breaking it. And remember, true love liberates. It doesn't confine. It doesn't control. It doesn't keep score. Family should be a foundation from which you grow, not a cage that confines you. What would you have done in my place? Leave a comment below, subscribe to hear more stories like mine, and remember, you're stronger than you know. I'm Linda Pearson, recording from my own home, where the keys belong only to those who live here.